thank you all for coming, and let me thank Scotiabank for their very generous $2 million investment. Our panelists today are Dr. Kosta Beznosov, professor in UBC's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Mr. Chris Inglis, former Deputy Director of the NSA, and Mr. Sandy Bird, IBM Fellow and Chief Technology Officer for IBM Security. I'm waiting with great interest to see what those different perspectives will bring.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to be a part of this exciting announcement with our friends at UBC, who are long-standing and value partners of ours. So on behalf of the BC and Yukon region, I want to thank the UBC staff, faculty, and students for your continued partnership and the opportunity to work together through the Scotiabank Cybersecurity and Risk Analytic Initiative. Scotiabank is proud to be a partner, and I look forward to the exciting outcomes which no doubt will come from this. And also a very special thank you to the esteemed panelists, and particularly Sandy and Chris for taking their time to travel in to be with us today. And we're so very fortunate to have such invaluable academic and business partners. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our executives and the leadership team at Scotiabank for your continued support and investment in our region and our leaders of tomorrow. We believe that UBC students are truly some of the best, and we're committed to supporting them to help them reach the full potential.
I want to thank everybody for being here today, and it's certainly my sincerest pleasure to be here on the grounds where I attended many, many years. And I want to thank the university for the hospitality you've extended to us. Certainly very much appreciated. I also want to extend a word of thanks to staff and alumni and others who are taking the time to join us, and also like to recognize our Scotiabank colleagues here in force here today to make sure I don't mess this up. And I'm also very pleased to have Scott Thompson, CEO of Finney International and a member of Scotiabank's board of directors in the audience today. Scott, where are you? Somewhere in there. Thank you for joining us today. We're certainly very proud of our history with the University of British Columbia. When I went here, we had one of our competitors on the grounds. Now we're proudly, as a member of this campus, and it is our busiest branch that we would have on campus. Our late president, Mr. Bruce Birmingham, was a president, he's now passed away, a former boss of mine as well, was an alumnus of this university and a very strong supporter of the Sauder School of Business. And as Dr. Ryder says, I'm a double alumni, as my wife's an alumni as well, and we're certainly very pleased to continue on the tradition. We have a son going to the university here as well. It's his job to stay at the university for a bit more. Can help it. Everyone has a parent somewhere along the line. But we're here because we believe that this relationship can even deepen even more. And I want to extend my personal thanks to Dean Helsley of the Sauder School of Business. I have to say 12 months ago, I mentioned to him that the university and Scotiabank, we would be very interested in extending our interest in investing in the university, and he moved with lightning speed. I have to admit, it was a good conversation, and it was part of the impetus why we're here. And again, thank you for that. Before I get to today's announcement, though, I want to provide some context to why we're here and what we're doing. And certainly, as a bank, Scotiabank has deliberately invested in universities that have focused on developing leading digital products and services such as advanced analytics, machine learning, and design thinking. Our academic partnerships are a critical component of the bank's digital strategy that's helping us become a digital leader in the financial services arena. To be clear, though, to be a leading digital bank is more than just developing trendy applications and sexy mobile apps. It's about having a very clear and a very regimented, robust cybersecurity strategy to protect our customers' information in this age of data proliferation. There's nothing more important to our customers and our shareholders than the security of our bank, especially at a time when malicious cyber activity is becoming very sophisticated and very frequent. Today's data theft now costs organizations in excess of $4 billion annually globally. Given its importance, cybersecurity is also a growing area of investment for Canada. According to a recent report, Canada ranks 4th globally in venture capital deals focused on cybersecurity, followed first by the US as number 1, Israel number 2, and the UK is number 3. We believe we need more talent in this critical and growing discipline. To that end, I'm very pleased today to announce that Scotiabank will be making a $2 million investment in the University of British Columbia to create the Scotiabank Cybersecurity and Risk Analytics Initiative. This initiative I'm very glad I didn't stumble on that. This initiative will support student programs, research, and internships, as well as engagement activities such as hackathons, conferences, and speaker series designed to achieve advancements in cybersecurity and financial modeling. Part of our investment will go towards the Creative Destruction Lab at the Sauder School of Business, which helps incubate new technology ventures. This builds on the investment we already made in a Creative Destruction Lab in Toronto. We are very excited to see what these partnership products produces for students here at the University of British Columbia, for the bank, and for the advancement of cybersecurity space as a whole. This concludes my formal remarks, and I want to thank you again for your hospitality and appreciate you hosting us today. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kyle McNamara, our Executive Vice President, Retail Technology, to host the panel. Kyle?
Thank you very much. And I'll ask the panelists to come up right away. And just want to remind you, you can open the app. It's alumni.ubc.cnf.io. So I'm just going to quickly jump in. I'm not going to do justice in introducing this esteemed panel because it's actually a very incredible panel we have in front of us. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Kosta, and I'm going to ask each of you just to give us a little bit about what you're seeing in cybersecurity and a little bit of your observation on the space. And Kosta, if you want to talk about your research or anything else on cybersecurity, would love you to kick it off.
Okay, so just for starters, let's make it clear what cybersecurity means. Yeah, being safe and free from worry when we use cybersecurity and when we are in cyberspace. And cyberspace is so diverse and omnipresent that basically everything becomes interconnected, and we have everything subject to cyber attacks, from your watch or my watch to bank systems and so on. So my research is also very diverse and cuts across different disciplines. So we looked at human aspects, at social aspects, at technical aspects of cybersecurity, from machine learning to specific algorithms, to studying how users interact with the technology and how they fall victims to different attacks and how technology can help them to be better.
Okay. Great. Chris, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so Chris Inglis, got my start at the National Security Agency in the mid-'80s. We were trying to build secure computers. I use that term advisedly. We thought that we could actually nail down the code and the hardware under that to the point where it would do exactly what we wanted to do and would never do what we didn't want it to do. We ultimately learned that that was a fool's chase because this other component hove into view, which was people. Right, and I think we increasingly know that if you're talking about cybersecurity, and I like Kosta's definition of the outcome, if you're talking about cybersecurity, you're actually trying to get a system in the right place, trying to actually get the technology and the people and the procedures that bind the two, trying to get those to where they'll actually meet your expectations and defend the things that are dependent upon cyberspace. As to the current trends that I see, we once worried about the availability or integrity or confidentiality of data, or the availability of infrastructure on which that data ran, and that was essentially the whole of our concern. But increasingly what we find is reconciliation that used to occur outside of cyberspace, conflicts, competition, collaboration, now takes place in cyberspace. And so things that are fundamentally dependent upon cyberspace are at risk. Perhaps the best known example in recent times down in the United States is the election of 2016, where allegedly the Russians attempted to change the outcome of that election not so much by twiddling the data inside cyberspace, but by altering our sense as to whether we could have confidence in the election systems or the content of the discourse that was taking place between people. And how was that all delivered? That was all delivered in and through cyberspace. And so there's so much more consequential things to think about in terms of cyberspace than the literal data or the literal hardware, software, and infrastructure that's inside of that. And we'll find that reconciliations increasingly take place in and through cyberspace about things that we never thought would be held hostage to cyberspace. Look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Chris. And Sandy?
I started my career in cybersecurity about 15 years ago, working for a university, trying to secure the university networks, and actually spun a company out of a university, which was later acquired by IBM in 2011. And at that time, you know, I'd watched the cybersecurity world kind of go back and forth between threats getting ahead of us, compliance cycles probably 4 times in those years building, you know, security analytics products. And it's really interesting to watch. We've kind of gone through one of those cycles again. You know, I was at RSA, which is the largest cybersecurity kind of trade show last month, and the number of vendors on the floor touting AI technology is going to save the day was phenomenal. It was everywhere. And I've spent the last probably year of my life working with Watson in cybersecurity, and I'll tell you, it does amazing things, but you've got to train it. So I'm a little leery of all the companies that say it's going to save the world. We've got a lot of work to do in that area, but it's really interesting, certainly from the area.
Can we continue on that trend?
Sure.
And can we talk about trends in general? Chris, you touched on one. Sandy, you touched on one. Kosta. So if you guys could just think about what you think is going to happen in the next couple of years, if you can spend a couple of moments, what trends are most interesting for our audience?
I still think that technology is going to outrun our ability to bend it to our purposes, that we'll find that whether it's the Internet of Things and embedded devices, things that aren't computers in and of themselves, but have computers as a fundamental component, they'll far and away outstrip our ability to figure out how do we make it such that we have the confidence they'll do what we want them to do and they won't do what we don't want them to do. And therefore, we'll have to double down on our education, our investment in people and procedures, so that we get that closer to right. We're going to find that technology has the inexorable fuel, right, that paces us forward, but we have to stop, pause, and I think that's why it's terrific that we're here at UBC today to think about what's the human component of that. If we don't get that right, we'll still be in a tail chase 20, 30 years from now, the way we've been over the last 35 years.
I think as we see all of these interesting IoT devices monitoring everything we do, how we interact with our house, our cars, our environments around us, all of that data goes somewhere, right? And when you start looking at, you know, the privacy of that data, and you just think about smart grid in your homes, I was working with a great startup company that could tell, you know, when did you turn your refrigerator on versus your air conditioner versus your toaster based on wave patterns that they were detecting in the electricity themselves. Well, that's really interesting, but all that data now goes to your, you know, provider, and then they sell that to other people, as all the other companies do in the world for this stuff. You know, where does that leave us from a privacy perspective? It's going to be really interesting. And then you have the opposite side of that on the, you know, we saw the large denial of service attacks with Dyn and things where, you know, IoT devices with absolutely horrendous security practices built into them were leveraged against the larger infrastructure. You know, we need to have policy around that. So again, back to the things that UBC can help with, you know, how do we help governments set policy for what is a minimum viable standard for security?
Kosta, anything to add?
Oh, some people define IoT as the Internet of Threats, so that's exactly why.
Yeah.
But what I expect in the next 5-10 years to happen is that because of the omnipresence of cyberspace and as a result omnipresence of cybersecurity, we will see more and more cybersecurity training embedded in all the programs at different educational institutions.
Yeah, that's what's really exciting about this, is just embedded directly within the program. Can I want to build on something you said, Sandy, because you touched on data privacy. Mm-hmm. And I just want to ask Chris or Kosta, is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you think about when you think about data privacy?
So I'm glad you chose me from NSA randomly in that regard. I think it's essential that we actually think our way through this. I don't think that, you know, in the States we often say that, you know, if you try to figure out how to trade security for privacy, you'll get neither, and vice versa. And I think that's exactly right. What we have to do is to align them. We have to figure out how to work harder to get both of those. And I think that that is in fact possible if we think up front about what our goals are with respect to each of those. My sense is with respect to governments, whether it's the Canadian government or the American government, is that we generally get that alignment right, despite what you hear, all the kind of exhortations what you hear. What we don't get right is enough transparency so that people understand that alignment and have comfort and, and confidence in that. I think the private sector is another matter altogether. I think it is okay that the private sector is racing ahead and collecting massive quantities of data to try to commercialize that data, in part because the private sector doesn't have the same authorities that the governments do. The private sector can't tax you, indict you, withhold your immigration status, and so we ought to hold government to a higher standard. But I think the tsunami wave that's next to hit the beach is a sense of what are the appropriate protocols and standards in the private sector for the collection of that information, the use of that information, and again, transparency back to those people who literally own that information. It's simply being held by those companies in the middle. We'll have to work our way through that. It's going to have to be led by policy, not by technology. We'll have to figure out what it is we want to achieve, and then bend technology and education and roles and accountability to that purpose.
And to inform the technology policymakers, we need to understand better exactly what privacy means for different people. Because privacy is like beauty in the eye of the beholder. So different demographic groups, different age groups, have different notion of privacy. How many of you know that, for example, teenagers, they lock their phones when they come home, and they share their password to or PIN to their phone with their best friends to signal the trust. So their notion of privacy is very different from the notion of privacy of many other age and demographic groups.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to build upon something you said, Chris, where you talked about public and private partnerships. So I'm going to throw it over to Sandy and just build upon that part.
Yeah, I think, and I always split it into even a third granularity. I always think academia, industry partners, and then government, right? The three, I think, are the three things that when they come together, you can get something really special. I've worked with universities across the globe. I'm from Fredericton, New Brunswick, so I have a great relationship with UNB there. I have a huge team in Israel, so the Ben Gurion University there, I have a great relationship with, in Queen's University in Ireland. And in all three of those cases, I've built these relationships where I've built, basically employees of ours sitting right beside the university so that they can work and interact with them on a weekly basis to build great projects. And it's interesting when you have, academia, the ideas these guys come up with is insane. It's like crazy blue in the sky because you're not hampered by the chains that we're shackled with in industry sometimes. But then when you have the industry guy working with them, you get this guys, yet another thing to detect denial of service is really not that important. It's like getting hit with a hammer on your foot. We know when we're under a denial of service attack. So you can bring them back to reality and say a lot of that stuff is already done. And it really creates this great synergy between those two things. And then when you have government in there to take some of these recommendations that come out and actually implement those to create safer devices and these things, it's the perfect storm.
Okay. Anything, Kosta, to add to that?
Could I add a bit? So I'm actually living three lives at the moment. I am a visiting professor at the United States Naval Academy in the Department of Cyber Science. I still do public service work, chairing defense science boards on various topics of interest, and then I work in the private sector to some degree. But let me talk a little bit about that first box. At the United States Naval Academy, it's a traditional four-year institution that then produces officers for the United States Navy, United States Marine Corps. If you know about West Point, this is the naval equivalent of that. The cyber major we have is called a cyber operations major, and it's not a cyber operations major. It's a major that says if you're going to go out and do something consequential in the world, in case of the Navy, it might be driving a submarine or an airplane, leading troops in the field, but it could be in the private sector. You're going to manage a hedge fund. You increasingly need to know what the consequences are of the dependence on that operation on cyber. And so that's really what the major is all about. We actually have three pieces of the major. One is a strong technology component. That's important. That's what's pacing the transformation in that space. But the other two are equally important, which is we concentrate a lot on human factors, the psychology of cyberspace, psychology of human beings in general, and then law, ethics, and all those things that essentially give us choices to make about how do we align these great goods in that space. It's not a competition with the computer science department at the Naval Academy. It's a competition actually with the political science department or the systems engineering department because it's a breadth-wise look at this, bringing all these disciplines together. I think as we think about cyber and educating people in cyber, we can't accept any function. We can't accept any discipline. They all actually have something to learn about what's happening in this space because most of us raised in the presence of this technology aren't digital natives, we're app natives. We know very little about how the technology actually works. We know a lot about how to make use of it, and the choices we make about dependencies in that space cause us to have to know a little bit more about what's happening underneath the surface. Not a lot, but a little.
Okay. Chris, I'm gonna stick with you for a little bit because I've got a hard one. I'm prepping you for a hard one. So,
oh my goodness, look at the time.
So last week, WikiLeaks released classified material on the Central Intelligence Agency's cyber hacking tools. So those documents revealed that CIA hackers can access messages on Apple and Android devices before they're encrypted. Obviously, very contentious topic in the public debate. So what's your view on the need between public safety and government surveillance?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think you can talk about this at many levels, and I wish we had time actually to talk about this at length, and so maybe in the after session we can do some more of this. At the first level, you'd have to wonder whether the government, in the form of the CIA, has got the alignment right between the pursuit of national security or international security, since the fruits of that work essentially accrue to many nations. Do they have that right in terms of the pursuit of those vulnerabilities for the purpose of collecting information, or the defense, right, of the kind of the same technologies used by our own citizens or friends, allies around the world? And you have to have confidence that there is in fact a process that makes that determination. I'm reasonably confident that there is such a process. It's not self-evident from the leaks that took place last week because they're done with such exhortation, but that's a really important question. It's not going to be either or. We're going to have to figure out how do we actually figure out how to do both, and we might have to work harder to do both of those. The second question you have to ask is, what's actually going on at a strategic level? And my own sense is that in the worst case, so this sounds like a bit of a conspiracy theory here, but in the worst case, this could be reflective of an information war. Don't forgive CIA if they essentially committed some mistake, right? Hold them accountable, kind of stare an unblinking eye at the United States government. But at the same time, we need to think about what's happening in the larger space. And my sense is this could in fact be a reflection of an information war. It might be that there's a nation state behind that who's essentially acquired this information and is selectively leaking this to portray the United States government, the CIA, in a bad light, and by the same token try to drive a wedge between it and allies in the rest of the world. That may be appropriate if these things are true. It may be that that's perhaps cast in a way that makes it exaggerated or bends it to some other purpose. We need to think about that. And if we don't like that answer, if we don't like that information war that's taking place, we either respond to that, which if you're going second, you're never in a winning position, or we lead with that. We talk about our values. We talk about what it is we would do with capabilities of that sort. We talk about the enduring principles that underpin our democracies, such that that's the story that you have to beat, as opposed to we're always chasing the next WikiLeaks or the next kind of salacious details that are leaked out by somebody that has an ulterior motive. And so I think about it at least those two levels. There's probably about 4 or 5 others in between of that, but worthy of a long conversation. If anybody wants to talk about that in the after session, I'd be happy to do it.
Great, thank you, thank you. I'm going to shift gears. There's obviously in Canada, we're trying to build up a talent and a dearth of talent of cybersecurity experts. So if you're a student and you're thinking about cybersecurity as a career, open-ended question, any one of you can jump in. What's your advice?
So again, big proponent of students taking anything they can in cybersecurity. We certainly have a huge need for those across all of Canada and the world in terms of skills. There's certainly different tracks. When I hire into the development teams developing cybersecurity products, we want to have them to understand how to write good secure code, but they don't have to understand how to run a security operations center, right? And then if I have a person I'm bringing in as a consultant that's going to go help a Scotiabank out for dealing with, how do they classify crown jewels, they need to understand things like risk and other areas. So there's different kind of tracks that you would use in training. There's also kind of the differences between, do you need to have a degree in mathematics and crypto to do security? And the answer is no, actually you don't. We need those people that go and do that, since we're going to go on to this quantum world where we're going to have to solve that problem. But in today's world, there are actually, kind of community college level programs that can get you kickstarted into cybersecurity too. So there's a whole range of ways to get into this. But definitely, computer science and engineering are the fundamentals that end up behind a lot of this.
Okay, anything to add, gentlemen?
Yeah, I just want to add that because cybersecurity is such a multidisciplinary area, I see the students who are more successful in, like, at least at the beginning of cybersecurity career, are those who have background from different areas. Math, computing, but also human-computer interaction, economics, and maybe even social science. And that helps them to attack pretty much any problem in their career related to cybersecurity, because they can look at the problem from very different angles, not just from technology, from algorithmic point of view.
Yeah, so if I could kind of foot stomp what Kosta just said, I think my own experience, whether it's at the National Security Agency or teaching cyber at the United States Naval Academy, is the students that tend to do best at trying to put all those pieces together and demonstrating a mastery of all the things necessary to have that confidence you spoke about earlier in and through cyberspace are systems thinkers, right? They don't necessarily have to start from a technology perspective or a single discipline's perspective. They actually think horizontally about how do you put all these pieces together. With respect to education writ large, I think that there's at least 3 levels. There's an all, many, and few. I think everyone needs to be cyber competent. So no matter what your chosen field of study is, you need to know enough about cyber so that you'll make intelligent choices in whatever that occupation is. Hopefully we'll know enough not to kind of click on a link that's a part of a phishing attack, but you need to know so much more in order to be cyber competent today, no matter what your discipline is, lawyer, engineer, and everything in between. The second is that there should be many people who actually understand how to build defensible systems, to actually defend them, and to bring to bear powers, instruments of power, which are individual in orientation, or perhaps from a private sector or public sector perspective, but they need to understand how do you actually defend businesses that are in and through cyberspace, dependent upon the resilience of cyberspace. And then few people need to have that deep expertise, whether it's in cryptography or computer science, electrical engineering, or human factors. There'll be a few people who essentially can bring those disciplines to bear in a way that makes some forward progress in terms of transforming the possibilities in that space. Educational institutions like this are expert at trying to figure out how to address those distinct and unique populations, but all of those increasingly have a very strong cyber component.
I'm going to switch to the tablet just for a quick second. So if you are just starting to learn about cybersecurity and you want to get a little bit more information to determine if it's your career path, any really quick advice on where to start?
Take my course.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know whether UBC, I bet they do or soon will, has an orientation course which essentially says, let's just give you kind of a peek under the tent flap of what cyber is all about. At the United States Naval Academy, no matter what your major is, you have to take a fundamental course in cyber. We teach them enough about how the networks work so that they could then say, I can build one, a simple one. We then teach them how to traverse those networks. How do you actually understand what's on a given network, both the kind of physical laydown of it, but the software and the behaviors that are taking place on it. Then we teach them how to attack it. That's great fun. And then we save for last, the most important thing is we teach them how to defend it. Coming out of that course, no matter whether you're an English major or a political science major or engineering major, you have a taste of what it means to essentially defend something in cyberspace or to be at risk for something in cyberspace. And there are a number of students who come out of that saying, I like that enough, I want to study it. But everyone comes out at least a little bit more competent. They tend to treat their social accounts very differently after they come out of that course than before they went into it.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
It's a tough thing, right? You can start with, some very basic stuff. It's probably better to actually go read a couple of these, crazy cyber books, actually, if you just wanted to get a taste of it, right? There's a great book called Future Crimes, which really goes into a lot of how some of these attacks happened and what's coming in the future. That's enough to get you sparked and interested in cybersecurity, I think. But after that, then you've got to start to look into more of these things and courses and those types of things.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks. You just touched on financial crimes. Can I ask you, Sandy, I'm going to stick with you. Can I ask you, how frequent are breaches? Just in general, how frequent are breaches? This is from the tablet.
Hourly? I don't know. Minutes, every minute. Breaches are very common. We've seen a huge escalation of the ones that are publicly disclosed over the last 4 to 5 years, right? So you've just seen a huge number of those. But a large organization deals with breaches literally on a daily basis. Now, some of them are very minor. A machine gets infected with a little piece of malware or a tracker on it, and we clean it up because we detect it early, and we do that. And sometimes you just have an insanely bad day, and you clean up a really big mess. And companies need to build skills to deal with all that, playbooks to run it from the time it's detected through to resolving it, including speaking to the media and all of those things. So it's a process, and again, industries, if you kind of rank them, right, you'll see like the financial services industries do that very, very well. When you get down to things like retail, it's a little rough. So again, depending on what industry you're in, we need more and more of these kind of very automated processes for dealing with breaches, but they do happen.
Yeah, so there's a wonderful website out there. It's called informationisbeautiful.com, no spaces in any of that. And if you kind of Google that and the word breach, it shows you a number of different things. But if you Google that and breach, there's a particular display that they've built, which is interactive. You can deal with it. You can say, I want to show all the breaches that have occurred to all sectors, say banking sector, government sector, military sector, academic sector, and I want to show all the causes. Or you can deselect some of those so that you can, in a fine-grained way, say, I just want to see a piece of that. What's most interesting is if you call that website up, the bubbles that each kind of indicate a breach, and you can click on the bubble, it'll tell you something about the breach that's underneath that, fill the screen. There's no white space left. And if you turn on all of the impacts and all of the sources, all of the causes, you'll get this big picture. Turn off the cause that's attributable to technology alone, and the picture is virtually unchanged.
Oh, really?
Meaning this is mostly a people issue. This is mostly about human error. But again, informationisbeautiful.com and the word breach, and you'll get that display. It's very instructive.
Okay. And Kosta, before you answer, I'm going to add on to the question, because there's a plant here, which is probably someone from your course. Can you tell us about a security breach found through your White Hat Hackers course you found memorable?
Memorable. I think the most memorable was the one where UBC lawyers had to get involved, but I'm not going to discuss that one. In my course, the students have to do a term project, and as part of the term project, they can choose to go with a security analysis of the system. And these days, after working with UBC lawyers and UBC IT security, we found a middle ground where the students actually have to get authorization from the system owners before they take on analysis of the system. And they were very good. Some of the projects were so good that the students helped significantly the companies to improve the systems. And some of the systems actually were UBC systems, and one system was handling data that was fairly sensitive, and UBC was very happy to see that the students found this vulnerability, and they decided to work with the system vendor to address it.
Yeah. Okay, great. I am going to jump back to talent, because the top question here is on talent. A couple of the questions I had that I was planning to ask was on talent as well. So let's just start with a general question, because I think all of you did a great job of describing potential jobs that you might be doing in cybersecurity, or what that might look like, and the different layers of knowledge that you might have. Let's talk about from the organization's perspective, and the organization and what types of skills that they're looking for from their cybersecurity experts. And a little bit of that would be, we'll talk a little bit about Canada and how Canada can ensure that we are generating the best possible talent to compete. Open-ended.
I can certainly start, right? Again, I think the universities building this into their curriculum is important. Same thing, even K-12, starting to make cybersecurity awareness courses for the general population is important. I think in terms of the industries hiring cybersecurity experts, you want some form of accreditation there, right? And I look across all kinds of different things depending on the job. Sometimes SANS courses are best. Sometimes you want the CISSP type scenario. There's all kinds of different balance there depending on the role. But you want something that says this person actually knows what they're doing. Experience, of course, trumps everything actually in cybersecurity. If you've done it before, you've cleaned up breaches, that's the guy we really want. Yeah. I will say, in my job though, so working at IBM and trying to solve this for people, obviously we would love to sell you guys consultants forever. That's great, but the reality is we have to actually take technology and use it to solve some of the skills gap as well, right? So we actually have to figure out how to use technologies in ways to reduce the number of people it is to solve any of these cybersecurity problems. And that's literally where I've spent probably the last 18 months of my career, is just trying to figure out how we take some of these cognitive technologies to reduce the time and number of people it takes to solve some of the problems. So it's really interesting.
Okay.
I think that's a great answer, and I'd just complement that, with need to make sure that people understand that this is important, not for its own sake, but what are the consequences, the societal consequences of getting it right or wrong. Need to make it such that we've educated the all, the many, the few at the earliest possible moment. And we need to make it interesting, and if not simply interesting, fun. Right? Competitions in this at the grade school and the high school level are increasingly available. And when you see the students, the kids that are in these competitions, they're genuinely having a good time. And they're kind of against their own expectations actually learning something along the way. And that ultimately begets, in many cases, a desire to pursue this as a career. We need to make sure that we're giving them every opportunity to do that.
Okay. Kosta, go ahead.
Yeah, in my cybersecurity course, I have speakers from industry who come and give talks, and at the end of each talk I always ask them, okay, so what kind of skills you are looking for in new hires? And recently one of the antivirus vendors was given a talk in my course, and what he said was that he wants to see passion, because the company is going to invest like next 12, 18 months training that particular new employee to handle the problems that they have, because no school can train them for this. And they want to make sure that employee will stay for a number of years with the company because of all this investment. And if the student has passion, if the students show that they really get volunteer into different projects or systems, then it's clear that it's a good investment for the company.
Okay. So I could add one more to that, which is that UBC can also, in engaging the various industry sectors and specific companies, ask not just are there career tracks that we should be preparing students for, but ask for internships, co-ops, because those internships and co-ops are a wonderful two-way proposition. At the National Security Agency, we would, on average, bring in about 300 to 500 students a summer, somewhere between their first and their last year of college. And at a distance, you might think that that was simply an investment in them, such that they might ultimately think about NSA as a career. But it turns out we would give them problems that we could not solve, and they would solve on average about a third of them every summer. It was the most extraordinary thing, because they knew no bounds. They actually didn't know that some of these problems were hard or impossible. And so there's a two-way street here, and it wound up being that we wouldn't find enough people to hire straight out of college if we hadn't made that investment earlier in the pipeline, and we would not have had the sort of progress that we needed to have to exceed the expectations of people in this space, useful, positive expectations of people in this space, if we hadn't made that investment early on in the pipeline of students and education.
Which I'm glad to say is part of the Scotiabank UBC partnership, as Dieter said, intern program, and we have our director of recruitment, Mike. If you can just wave your hand oh, he is here somewhere, and we are actively recruiting students right now. I want to jump back to where we started, which was you gave a little bit of an overview on cybersecurity and also talked about some of the trends in the marketplace. If you can just elaborate, because we hear a lot about artificial intelligence, we hear a lot about breaches, we hear a lot about different situations in the media. So if you could just talk about the future trends that you're seeing right across the board. Kosta, can I start with you?
I think I would be probably last to talk about this, because you guys know much more about trends in the industry.
I can, again, since the cognitive stuff is my passion, I'll spend a little time on that, and I'll tell a few stories, because it's always fun to do that. So as I said, in the last 18 months, we've tried to apply cognitive stuff to reducing the number of people to solve security problems. So to do that, we're IBM, so we train Watson. I'm not allowed to say AI, I'm supposed to say Watson, I think is the way that works. And it's been a really interesting process. You know, everybody believes that these systems just solve magic, and that's great. And what I discovered during this process was, well, everyone told me that. The reality is you had to train them. And so back to new careers and new jobs that'll be showing up, training these systems is an insanely monotonous process. So much so that we couldn't get security people to do it, because we would give it to the SOC analysts and we would say, can you train the system based on all these documents that are marked up with, this is the attacker and these are the indicators and this is the, and after about the fourth document, I say, I'm not doing this. This is terrible, right? And it was one of these things that it was like this epiphany that when I was like, these are not the cybersecurity guys that we have to use to train the actual AI systems. But once we got them trained, then we learned all kinds of new things, like the fact that, we started out with this process with this, and people in the room that are in security would know what sticks and taxi and cybox are, but it's this massively complex language for describing, any type of indicator that might be involved in an attack. And we had these poor people marking these documents up with 263 indicator types that could possibly happen in these documents. And we built this massive model, and it didn't work at all. It was wrong all the time. It was terrible. And we went to the guys in IBM. We have great researchers that do this, and we would say, what's wrong with this? And they're like, you guys are way too complicated. You're trying to basically train this thing as if it's a PhD already in the subject. We need to go way back and pretend it's in kindergarten here and just tell it what security is. And we simplified the model, and we did something. We actually got some really great results out of it. But it took a long time to do that. And what was really interesting about the process was there was lots of intermediary steps. For one of our steps, it thought ransomware was a city, which was kind of funny, right? It's like, why does it think it's a city? It's not a place I want to live. And so we learned all this great stuff. But it's taught me that, just applying, machine learning and deep learning and AI to these problems doesn't solve them. You still need huge amounts of expertise, not only in the subject matter now, but also into how to use these systems, right? Mm-hmm. Which means you can't just, say, hey, we'll take a new machine learning algorithm and throw it against this thing and it's going to work. So there's a learning curve that's going to happen. So people in the room that know this, lovely Gartner curve of, height of illusionment and then trough of disillusionment, and as it goes, we're at the height right now, definitely in terms of what AI is. We're going to have a big crash come out of this thing yet. Okay. But again, as we recover from that, there's huge promise in these technologies. They really are going to make a difference. So that's a trend, but it's not going to happen instantly. It's going to happen over 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think there's a huge promise in these technologies in all the ways that Sandy described. Kind of in robotics, are normally kind of characterized as if it's dull or dirty or dangerous, turn it over to a robot. And then take artificial intelligence or perhaps the heuristics that are just short of that a further distance to give you insight into what's happening in these very complex systems. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for a role of a human being, right? Because these systems are supposed to support human endeavors. They're supposed to actually help us do something we couldn't do otherwise ourselves. They're not meant to be things that have their own lives independent of human beings. And I'll observe that a machine with a human being can beat a machine alone every time, right? And so you need to figure out what's the right man-machine, human-machine interface, what's the right combination of those two, as opposed to thinking about machines for their own sake or in their own context. And I think where that research is going is how do you actually create the meld of those two that gives you the most possible or the most optimal understanding of what's happening in very complex environments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So to make cyberspace more secure, I think the biggest trend will continue is that work on the human aspects of the security, not only from the point of view of experts who have to train systems or use complex systems, but like end users. Like all of us have supercomputers in our pockets these days, and these things can do a lot of stuff, yeah. So how to make the interactions with these devices that are gateways to all the online services that we use, from online dating to banking, pretty much everything, yeah. So developing technology that will support us as end users to be safer. That's probably the biggest trend that I foresee going on. Okay. It's like with public health.
Okay. Okay. So very quick, last question. Are we recruiting enough women into cybersecurity, and what can we do to recruit more? Sandy, start with you and we'll go across.
We are trying very hard to. It goes in bits of waves. I always track our co-ops, actually, as they come in. And we did fairly good, actually. We were at about a 35% to 40% women over a couple of years. But for some reason, unexplainable to me, this year, it fell off a cliff. It was down in like the 15%, which is it's not an IBM-wide, it's Canada in a couple of our labs that I was looking at. But, and I asked specifically, why is this? And there were no applicants. And so I went back to the Dean of Computer Science, and he said, actually, the enrollment rate is actually down as well, which is really scary to me, because again, it's hard to fix a problem if you can't get that enrollment rate up, right? And I don't know what the stats are here. It'd be really interesting to hear your numbers, if they're the same or not, but it's worrisome, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, the statistics would show that they're not showing up in the numbers that you would hope, and I think that we need. right? Because we need the diversity of intellect that comes from those different experiences, the different perspectives, the different way of seeing a problem, so that we have a competitive advantage that comes from diversity. It's not divisive, it's unifying. It's a business imperative. And so we need to figure out what we have to do to make it attractive to all of those diverse intellects, whether that's divided by your origins in terms of culture or religion or sex. We need a diversity in this space in order to handle the complexity that is naturally inherent in this space.
Kosta,
In my
anything to add?
courses, I see a gradual increase of female students, but it's not enough. It's definitely not enough. But it's interesting to see also that project groups that have female students in those groups perform better on average.
Okay. Yeah, I think research has shown that over and over again, that especially when you require a whole bunch of different ideas to be getting the diversity of opinion, just as you said, Chris. So thank you very much to our panelists. You guys were fantastic. Very much appreciated. A round of applause.